Thanks for starting your week with us. Hello and welcome to Business Daily. I'm your host, Geun. Let's see what you can look forward to in the latter half of our program. We talk about the Bank of Korea's latest rate cut and whether this downward pressure is enough to help the Korean economy get back on track. A look back over the years shows things are getting harder for the middle class here in Korea, as certain costs are jumping at much faster rates than their income levels. The Korean government is pulling out all the stops to block the Middle East respiratory syndrome, or MERS, from spreading further. Finance Minister Geun said he noticed a significant drop in the number of foreign tourists at Incheon International Airport during a visit on Sunday. Concerned that the outbreak might dampen the tourism industry during the summer peak season, the minister said the government is doing all it can to get the country's tourism industry back on track. Some of those efforts include enhancing daily inspection methods and building a one-on-one response system for those under self-quarantine. The minister called on Koreans to normalize economic activities, saying it's the first step to win back trust from the global community. The daily stock price band of Korea's two main bourses, the Kospi and Kosdaq, has been doubled as of Monday to allow a greater range of movement of up to 30%. The Korea Exchange says it aims to reduce risks of speculative trading and boost transactions by drawing in more investments and invigorating the market. The market operator also added that it will introduce more detailed circuit breakers to prevent high volatility from the expanded band. It says the expansion of the daily cap falls in line with more advanced markets, which provide investors with greater autonomy. Now, the so-called wage peak system can help save some big bucks for Korean companies if introduced next year, when labor costs are expected to surge due to an extension in the country's retirement age. According to Korea Economic Research Institute, companies can shave off some $23 billion over the span of 5 years by lowering wages of 55-year-old employees by 10% annually. Firms as of now face a $96 billion hike in labor costs, with the new retirement age of 60 set to kick in next year. The wage peak system offers a maximum salary at a certain age and gradually reduces the figure paid out. A recent study looked at household income and a number of other factors to measure the quality of life for middle-income families here in Korea, and how those factors have changed for the last 20 years. And now this study actually showed that a disproportionate increase in certain costs has been posing challenges for many households up until this day. Our Jung on the story for us this morning.
Over the past 2 decades, the monthly income of the country's middle class, which constitutes roughly 70% of the total population, has seen a gradual increase. While nominal monthly earnings stood at an average of just over $700 in the early 90s, that figure is now 5 times higher. But with the surge in disposable income has also come a rapid increase in expenses, which analysts say has brought down the quality of living. In particular, the growth in housing expenditure has far exceeded the rise in money flowing into households. This is a notable trend, especially when it comes to jeonse homes, which require large deposits instead of monthly rent payments. Hyundai Research Institute says a greater number of people in the middle-income bracket are struggling to get by, as the average jeonse deposit jumped 14-fold over the past 24 years, from $8,000 in 1990 to $109,000 last year. That's almost an average increase of 12% each year.
Housing expenses are increasing twice as fast as people's incomes. You have to make a living on the money after you exclude payments for housing, so if those costs rise, you end up with less money to live on. That's one of the main reasons why people feel strained in spending.
But it's not just housing expenses, but the increased cost of private education that's further straining the purse strings of those in the middle-income bracket.
The Research Institute says the average cost of private education in a 3-person household accounts for roughly 17% of total disposable income, a 3.6 percentage point hike since the 90s.
I can't invest everything in my children anymore because I also have to prepare for retirement. But it's not like I can do without spending on private education, so it's hard to deal with.
Experts say the government needs to provide more rent-based homes and make it easier for people to take out loans for housing deposits, while improving fundamentals for the education system to curb excessive spending. Lee Ju-young, Business Daily.
%1.5%. Now, that's the number the Bank of Korea announced last week as it once again lowered the country's key interest rate. Despite massive household debt, the BOK cut its rate to a fresh low. Now, growing threats of the Middle East respiratory syndrome or the MERS outbreak played a big part in this decision. Will this rate cut become the knight in shining armor for the troubled Korean economy? Let's find out.
The Bank of Korea slashed its key interest rate to an unprecedented low of 1.5%, down 25 basis points last week. This is the BOK's fourth cut since August of last year, and it comes at a time when concerns about the MERS outbreak is posing threats to the economy.
We decided to take preemptive measures in order to alleviate potential negative effects on Korea's real economy as well as on sentiments of economic agents.
With slumping exports and a slowdown in consumption, the central bank believes if this trend continues, the country will not be able to meet its growth target of 3.1% this year. In the face of unfavorable conditions on multiple fronts, will the central bank's move be enough to spark new growth, or does the government need to turn to other solutions?
And to tell us more about this, we're now joined by Professor Yang Jun-seok from the Catholic University of Korea. So good to have you join us this morning.
Happy to be here.
All right, so this rate cut came only about 3 months after the Bank of Korea lowered its key interest rate to a record low of 1.75%. Now it stands at 1.5%. What are some of the factors do you think played in this?
Okay, well, as stated in the report, the three big ones were lack of consumption growth, lackluster exports, and the MERS outbreak. But I think there has been some newspaper reports saying that the Bank of Korea really wants to get proactive. I think they were caught very much by this Seoul incident last year, where almost everybody thought that the effects would last only about 1 or 2 quarters, and everybody was surprised that it lasted a lot more. So this time they're taking sort of a earlier approach, not to let the problem develop as much.
All right, well then how much do you think this will actually help the economy in terms of, I guess, local consumption and exports?
Okay, well, somewhat worrying aspect of this is that the rate cut came somewhat of a surprise, and Korean interest rate is now historically never been lower. And the stock market didn't really respond that much. Usually when you have a surprise rate cut, you have a rise in stock prices, at least for a day or two, but it's been amazingly quiet. So what's worrying is that perhaps the market thinks it's not going to do that much good.
All right, well then again, the massive household debt has constantly been a source of concern for all of us here. Korea has one of the highest household debt in GDP ratio, debt to GDP ratio among major economies. Considering this, do you think the BOK's rate cut was the right move?
Okay, well, we've been very concerned about some of the problems that's coming up with the household debt. So I think that limits the power of the monetary policy. I think that's one part of the reason why the stock market didn't respond very well. But I wish that the rate cuts came with some other policies by the government as well. I think the rate cut by itself is not proving that powerful lately.
All right, well, continuing on with the household debt, the Bank of Korea certainly realizes that it's a growing problem here. And it mentioned managing the country's debt levels as a whole. What does this exactly mean?
It basically means that we will not let the household debt get beyond a certain amount. So when people come to get a loan from the bank, they might not find the funds available. But that also limits the power of monetary policy somewhat, because what we want to do with monetary policy, at least for the short run, is the people to borrow more and then use that money for investment and consumption. So I think Bank of Korea is making a balanced approach here, or trying to.
All right. Well, more people have been calling for the government to draw up supplementary budget. Do you think this is necessary?
I think they'll have to do it at the second half of the year. Right now, Korea has been scheduling more than 50% of its payments at the first half of the year to try to perk up the economy, but it hasn't been perking up very much. So in the second half of the year, unless they have a supplementary budget, they're going to have less than half of the annual budget available to try to spark up the economy. So they'll probably have to do some expansionary supplementary budget.
Okay, well, what about the U.S. Federal Reserve and its expected funds rate hike? Do you think its expected rate hike played a role in Korea's rate cut this time around?
Well, I think when the U.S. raises its rate, it's probably going to be 0.25%, but it's going to make it harder for Bank of Korea to lower our rates because they don't want too much of a difference between the rates. So I think they thought that this would be a chance to lower the rate before the U.S. raises it.
All right. Well, moving forward, do you think there will be any further rate cuts, and do you think it's likely for Korea to lower the growth target again?
Okay. Well, I wouldn't be surprised if they lowered it once more sometime in the early second half of the year, third quarter or very early fourth quarter. But that depends on how well this current rate cut takes. If it surprises me and this rate cut does very well, then obviously there won't be a need for an additional
further
one.
Rate cut.
Right.
Well, what about the growth target? Do you think Korea will likely to lower it again?
If it goes at this pace, then it'll have to be a lower revision. We're trying to avoid that, but if it goes at this pace, then they'll probably have to lower it.
All right. Okay. Thank you so much for your insight today, Professor.
Thank you.
That wraps it up for this edition of Business Daily. Hope you enjoyed it, and we'll be back with more tomorrow, so don't forget to tune in then. Thanks for watching, and have a great day.